Hello worlds, I'm Anka, and I've decided to start story readings because I think it's a pretty fun thing, and I like reading stories, and I hope you like me reading them. If not, then I'm not forcing you to watch this, so. Um, the first story I'm doing on my channel is, well, they'll just be shorter books, but I may, if you want me to, or if I want to, I'll go into longer books and novels, but for now I'm just going short ones, like this book I'm going to do by Sarah Weeks. I apologize in advance if I'm not the best at reading. Please keep in mind this is the first story reading I've read aloud of a whole book, so just, for example, if I'm not loud enough or I don't pronounce things at first and I repeat a lot of words, or the voices change because I do little voices so you can know which characters are which. Just I switch them a bit. Or if there's anything that sounds strange or bad, I'm sorry. I don't have the best microphone thing either, so just please bear with me. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this little reading by Sarah Weeks, Honey, the author of Pie. Also a very good book, so thanks for listening, and I hope you like my story reading. Bye! Honey by Sarah Weeks. Chapter 1. Knock, knock, Teeny Nelson called through a knothole in the high wooden fence that separated the Nelsons' yard from the Bishop's. Melody pretended not to hear. She was on a mission. She had had a serious sweet tooth, and her personal candy fund was running dangerously low. That morning at breakfast, her father had offered to pay her a nickel for every dandelion plant she could pull out of the lawn. Her plan was to try to earn enough money to buy herself a pack of wild berry Skittles, maybe even two. For your information, when I say knock knock, you're supposed to say who's there, Teeny instructed. For your information, Melody told her, I'm busy. Does it look like you're busy, said Teeny, putting a big blue eye upon the up to the knothole. Looks like you're picking dandelions. Can I help? It was a Saturday morning in May. The weather in rural Indiana had been unseasonably warm for weeks, and the promise of summer hung in the air. A pair of cardinals was busy building a nest in a rhododendron near the northeast corner of the Bishop's house, and somewhere down the street a lawnmower droned like a giant bumblebee. You'll need to use the weed fork, Melody's father had explained. You have to get out the whole root. Otherwise, the dandelion will grow back. The good news was that the front yard was chock full of dandelions. The bad news, Melody quickly discovered, was that she had significantly underestimated how stubborn a dandelion root could be. She had already been out in the yard for half an hour when Teeny showed up, and yet had yet to successfully pull out a single plant with the roots still attached. I said, can I help? Teeny repeated. She had scrambled up the fence and was hanging over the top now. Her round face made her plump pink cheeks look like 2 dinner rolls sitting on a plate. Melody sighed. Maybe your mother needs help with something at your house, she hinted. One of the many annoying things about Teeny Nelson was that she couldn't take a hint. Another was that she asked too many questions. How come you're wearing gloves? Because I don't want to get my hands dirty, Melody answered. How come your hair's so short? 'Cause I like it that way. Aren't you scared people will think you're a boy? I don't care what people think, Melody said. Teeny Nelson had on a white tank top with pink lace trim, and her long blonde hair was pushed back off her forehead with a sparkly plastic headband. Melody didn't own anything sparkly. She wore jeans in the winter and cutoffs in the summer, sneakers year-round, and on top, either a t-shirt or one of her father's old button-down shirts, untucked with the sleeves rolled up. Melody jammed the weed fork into the ground beside a large dandelion as Teeny taunted. I know something you don't know. Good for you, Melody told her as she worked the weed fork back and forth to loosen the root. Aren't you going to ask me what it is? No. It's about you, said Teeny, hopping to entice her. Still no, said Melody. She couldn't imagine what Teeny Nelson could possibly know that would be of any interest to her. Mama says you don't have a mama, Teeny blurted out, unable to hold it in any longer. Melody snorted. You think I don't know that? I'm just saying, said Teeny. Mama says you don't have one. Melody set down the weed fork and looked up at Teeny. Not that it's any of your beeswax, but my mother died when I was born, so I did have a mother. I just don't anymore. It was not a particularly sensitive subject for Melody. The fact that she didn't have a mother was simply a fact. She and her father were very close. It had always been just the two of them. Don't you miss your mama? Asked Teeny. How could I? Melody answered. I never even met her. Who cooks dinner for you? My dad. Who tucks you in at night? Asked Teeny. No one, said Melody. I'm too old to be tucked in. Guess how old I am. I don't have to guess. I know how old you are. You're 6. No, I'm not, insisted Teeny. I'm going on 7. Melody gathered a handful of leaves and began gently pulling, trying to ease a dandelion plant out of the ground without breaking off the root. No such luck. Impudent weed, she muttered, throwing the broken plant down on the lawn, which was already littered with a salad of leaf bits and decapitated yellow dandelion heads. Melody was unaware that most 10-year-olds didn't use words like impudent, but her father was a high school humanities teacher. She couldn't help it if she had an unusually large vocabulary for someone her age. Why don't you pick the flowers instead of trying to pull out the whole ding-dong thing? Teeny asked. Melody didn't feel like having to explain the do's and don'ts of pulling dandelions to a 6-year-old. Are you sure your mother doesn't need you for something at home? She asked Teeny. Teeny crossed her eyes and made a rude noise with her tongue, then let go of the fence and dropped back down in her own yard with a soft thud. Melody heaved a sigh of relief. With Teeny out of her hair, she could turn her full attention to her work. If things didn't pick up soon, she wouldn't be able to afford a single skittle, let alone 2 packs of them. Not long after, Melody's father came out to check on her progress. How's it going? He asked. Let's put it this way, she told him. The dandelions are winning. Her father laughed. I'm going to walk down to Wingley's to pick up a few things, he said. Want to come along? Absolutely, Boris, said Melody, jumping up and pulling off her gloves. As in positively, Doris? Her father asked. As in affirmatively, Boris, she shot back. As in unequivocally, Doris. It was a silly word game they'd invented called Boris and Doris Thesaurus. Melody quickly racked her brain for another synonym. As in unilaterally, Boris, she said uncertainly. Her father shook his head. Nice try, Mel. Unliterally means something done without the agreement of participation of other people it might affect, he said. Come on, I'll race you to the end of the driveway. Loser has to do the dishes tonight. Melody was pretty sure her father let her win the race, but she didn't care. Lately he'd been so distracted he burnt everything he cooked, and with all the pots and pans that needed extra scrubbing, doing the dishes had become a real chore, and his tendency to burn things wasn't the only unusual thing she noticed about his behavior lately. He'd been whistling You Are My Sunshine pretty much non-stop for weeks, and just that morning he let the bathtub overflow for the 2nd time. More than once Melody had walked into a room and caught him staring off into space with a goofy-looking grin on his face. When she'd ask him what was going on, he acted like he had no idea what she was talking about. But Melody knew her father better than anyone. Something was definitely up. Chapter 2. Have you ever noticed that most people say, I could care less, when what they really mean to say is that they couldn't care less? Melody's father asked as they walked into the grocery store together. He was always pointing out things like that, which was why, even though she was only 10, Melody knew that it was champing at the bit, not chomping, and that the expression the proof is in the pudding was actually the proof of the pudding is in the eating. What do you want me to get? She asked her father. They always split up the shopping list to save time. There was only a few things on it that day, so while her father headed off to the dairy aisle to get milk and grated cheese, Melody went in search of spaghetti. Oh, and we need cereal too, he called back over his shoulder. Nothing too sugary, okay, Mel? She was reaching for the Raisin Bran when she noticed an eyelash stuck to the tip of her finger. Carefully transferring the eyelash from her fingertip to the back of her left hand, she closed her eyes, made a wish, and blew. When she opened her eyes, a woman in a tight black dress was strolling by, pushing a shopping cart. She glanced over at Melody and stopped short. I'd know that face anywhere, she exclaimed, and proceeded to march right over and throw her arms around Melody. Melody had never seen this person before in her life, and was debating whether to punch her in the stomach or scream bloody murder when her father showed up with a gallon jug of 2% milk in one hand and a container of Parmesan cheese in the other. The minute the woman caught sight of him, she let go of Melody and threw her arms around him and said, "There you are, you handsome devil, you," she cried. "Here I am," Melody's father said, awkwardly holding the jug of milk to one side and trying to pat the woman on the back with the hand still clutching the cheese. "I've missed you, Henry," the woman said, hugging him even tighter. When she finally let go, Melody's father made the necessary introductions. "Mel, this is Nancy Montgomery, an old friend of your mother's and mine. Nancy, this is Melody," the woman said. "I knew it the minute I saw her." "How do you do?" Melody said, extending her right hand, partly to be polite, but mostly to make up for the fact that she'd come very close to punching this woman in the stomach a minute ago. Instead of shaking Melody's hand, Nancy burst into tears. "You were just a wee little thing the last time I saw you, and look at you now, all grown up and wanting to shake hands." The way she said it made Melody feel like a dog. "Even with that short haircut," the woman went on, "I knew who you were. You're the spitting image of your mother." Melody's father shifted uncomfortably. "There isn't a day that passes that I don't think about your mother," the woman said, breaking into a fresh round of tears. "Please, Nancy," Melody's father said quietly. "I'm sorry." The woman pulled a tissue out of her purse and blew her nose. "She was so young, and I remember how much she was looking forward to having—" "Please, Nancy," Melody's father implored. "This is neither the time nor the place." As far as Melody could tell, her father never felt it was the right time or place to talk about her mother. Melody had once asked him to tell her about the day her mother had died. It was the first time she'd ever seen him cry, and she'd never brought up the subject again. Meanwhile, Melody's father wasn't the only one who avoided talking about her mother. She'd been the closest thing to a celebrity Royal Indiana had ever known, but nobody ever mentioned her name anymore, at least not around Melody. Having recovered her composure, Nancy informed them that the reason she was in town was because her family was having a reunion. "The theme is Cherished Moments of Yesteryear. The name was my idea," she said proudly. Nancy and Melody's father made small talk for a while, then after promising to keep in touch, they said their goodbyes, which resulted in more awkward hugging. "You don't hear that expression very often anymore," Melody's father said later as they left the store with the groceries. "Cherished moments of yesteryear, you mean?" asked Melody. Her father laughed. "No, spitting image. There's an ongoing debate about its origin. One side claims it was originally spit and image. The other insists that spit is actually a southern pronunciation of spirit." Melody considered asking her father if he thought she looked like her mother too, but decided against it. They had reached the corner and were standing side by side on the curb waiting to cross the street. "Why is this light taking so long to change?" Melody complained. "There's hardly even any traffic." "Patience is a virtue," his father said. Melody rolled her eyes. "I knew you were going to say that," she told him. The light changed and they started across. "So, you think I'm predictable, do you?" her father asked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of Wildberry Skittles. "Hey," Melody exclaimed, "where did those come from?" "I had the cashier ring them up when you weren't looking. What do you think of your old man now?" Melody's father handed her the candy, clearly pleased that he'd been able to pull off the surprise. He, more than anyone, knew how hard it was to keep a secret from her. "Can I eat them now?" she asked. "I promise it won't spoil my appetite." "Far be it from me to stand between a girl and her Skittles," he said. After they got home and put away the groceries, Melody set the table while her father got dinner started. They were having spaghetti with canned Chef Boyardee meat sauce, one of a grand total of 3 meals. Melody's father knew how to prepare. As he placed a pot of water on the stove to boil, he suddenly remembered something he'd been meaning to ask. "Did you get your math test back today?" Melody groaned. "I was hoping you'd forgotten." Her father opened the drawer and started rummaging around. "Mel, have you seen the—" "It's over there," she said, pointing to the can opener, which was in the silverware section of the dish strainer. "Tell me what happened," he said as he cranked the opener around the metal rim of the can. Chef Boyardee looked on approvingly from the label. "It was all Miss Hogan's fault," Melody said. Melody's father was used to hearing her complain about her teacher. Thanks to Miss Hogan, the only positive thing Melody had to say about in 5th grade was that it was almost over. "I got a 73, Melody said as she opened the cupboard and handed him the pot of olive oil. He twisted off the cap, poured a few drops into the water, and passed it back. 73, he said. "How did that happen?" "Mary used 1 cup of sugar to make 2 cherry pies. How much sugar on average did Mary use in each pie? What was your answer? I said that on average, Mary used a half a cup of sugar in each pie. Melody's father furrowed his brow. Huh, that's what I would have said too. Then you would have been wrong, because the answer is 0.5. Something sputtered on the stove. Melody grabbed a wooden spoon off the counter and handed it to her father. I'm no mathematician, but isn't 0.5 the same thing as 1/2? He asked as he lowered the flame and stirred down the sauce. Miss Hogan told us all the answers had to be in decimals, Melody explained. But she didn't use decimals in some of the questions. She was trying to trick us. Did anybody else fall for it? Nick did, said Melody. He tried to talk Miss Hogan into changing his grade by telling her that he watches the Food Network all the time, and no one ever says 0.5 of a cup of anything in real life. We could use someone like him on the debate team, said Melody's father, his eyes twinkling with amusement. You may think it's funny, but I don't. I hate word problems, said Melody, and I hate Miss Hogan even more. You know how I feel about that word, Melody's father said sternly. I know, but Miss Hogan doesn't like me either. She doesn't get any of my jokes, and she thinks math is fun. I wish I could have had Mrs. McKenna again this year. Her father nodded. No doubt about it. You two were a very good fit, he said, rinsing out the empty sauce can and tossing it into the recycling bin. But I'm sure Miss Hogan has her virtues, too. Did you know that she and Mrs. McKenna are good friends? I always see them sitting together at district staff meetings. Really? Asked Melody. Ask her yourself, he said, and while you're at it, why don't you ask her if you can retake the test or do some extra credit homework to bring up that grade? I'm sure she can be a very nice person if you give her a chance. Melody suddenly smelled something burning. Dad, the sauce! The smoke detector started screeching, and Melody's father swatted at it with a dish towel until it stopped. I'm glad I'm not the only one who has to scrub out that pan, said Melody. I don't mind, said her mother. He'd been in such a good mood lately. Nothing seemed to faze him. As he served up the spaghetti and set the steaming plates on the table, he started whistling You Are My Sunshine again. What is it with you in that song? Asked Melody. Melody's father reached over and tousled her hair. Give me a break. Can a fellow whistle a happy tune around here if he wants to? He asked. But Melody couldn't shake the feeling that her father was hiding something from her. One way or another, she was determined to find out what it was. Chapter 3. Honey. That's what started the whole thing. It's what awakened Melody Bishop in the middle of the night, and what she was still thinking about the next morning when she got up. Maybe she had misheard, she told herself. After all, she had been half asleep, or maybe she had dreamed it. But deep down, Melody knew she hadn't been dreaming, and she was certain about what she had heard. Honey. It had been a week since she and her father had run into Nancy Montgomery at the grocery store. Her father had continued to behave strangely and denied that there was anything unusual going on. As a result, Melody had kept her eyes and ears open, and eventually it paid off. After making her bed and tucking pajamas under the pillow, she got dressed and went downstairs. Her grandfather's oxygen tank was sitting in the hallway, the long, thin plastic tube coiled up on the floor beside it, hissing like a snake. Melody had completely forgotten that he was coming to stay for the weekend. She pushed open the screen door and stepped out on the porch. In case anyone's interested, I'm awake, she hollered across the yard. The garage door was open, and the scuffed toes of her grandmother's leather slippers were sticking out. Be there in a sec, Grandpa hollered back. I'm just looking for the hammer. That's what Grandpa always said when he got caught smoking in the garage. Even after he'd been diagnosed with anesthesia, he'd refused to give up his precious Pall Malls. When he thought no one was paying attention, he would unhook himself from the oxygen tank and sneak out for a smoke. Melody went back inside, where she found a note on the kitchen table scribbled on the back of a yellow flyer announcing the grand opening of a new beauty salon in town. She ran her fingers through her short brown hair. She'd never set foot in a beauty salon. Her grandmother had always trimmed Melody's hair for her when she was little, and after Grandma had passed away, Melody had learned to do it herself, angling the mirror on the medicine cabinet door in order to be able to see the back of her head. Have a great weekend. Take good care of Grandpa, her father had written in his familiar chicken scratch. In case of emergency, call this number. Melody sincerely hoped there wouldn't be any reason to call the number, since it was impossible to tell her father's 8s from his 4s or his 2s from his 3s. He'd signed the note in his usual way, XO times infinity, Dad. Melody set the note aside and poured herself a glass of milk. There was a box of assorted donuts sitting on the table. She chose one dusted with powdered sugar, broke it in half, was just about to dip it in the milk when the screen door squeaked open and Melody heard her grandfather shuffle in. I'm in the kitchen," she called out to him. A minute later, Melody's grandfather was wrapping his arms around her in a big bear hug. The oxygen tube was back in place under his nose, teetering him to the cylindrical tank which sat on the little cart beside him. Melody held her breath as she returned her grandfather's hug. She loved him dearly, but hated the smell of the cigarette smoke that clung to his clothes and hair. "Did you see the note from your father?" he asked. You should have been a doctor with that handwriting of his." "Do all doctors have bad handwriting?" Melody responded, dunking the tail end of her donut in the milk. "Mine's got hairy arms," said Grandpa. "In case you don't know, that's not a sequitur," Melody told him. "Hairy arms have nothing to do with handwriting. Give me a break, Grandpa. Do you really think I don't know what looking for the hammer is an enthusiasm for smoking out in the garage?" Grandpa laughed and pinched her cheek. "Somebody's full of beans this morning," he said. "Any particular reason?" As a matter of fact, there was. "Have you noticed Dad's been acting kind of discombobulated lately?" Melody asked. "Henry's always been a little forgetful, even as a boy. But come to think of it, this morning when I got up here, I noticed his socks didn't match," said Grandpa, rubbing his chin. "That's nothing," Melody told him. "Yesterday I opened the freezer and found a copy of the Red Badge of Courage sitting on top of the box of frozen waffles." "In the freezer?" Dad tried to laugh it off, but he'd been acting strange for weeks, staring off into space, whistling the same song as he burned everything he Dad tried to laugh it off, but he's been acting strange for weeks, staring off into space, whistling the same song, and he burns everything he cooks now, too. "That reminds me, I made us a tuna noodle casserole for dinner," said Grandpa. Melody tried not to let her disappointment show. Her grandfather was a terrible cook. She'd been planning to ask if they could order pizza for dinner. The phone rang and Grandpa reached to answer it. "It's Nick," he said, handing her the receiver a moment later. "I'll give you two some privacy while I go out to the garage to look for—" "Oh, who am I kidding? You're right. It is an enthusiasm." He started to leave, then paused and put a hand on Melody's shoulder. "Don't worry about your dad, Millie," he said. "He always gets this way at the end of the school year. Once he turns his final grades, I'm sure he'll be back to his old self again." What Grandpa didn't understand was that Melody wasn't worried. She was excited. In fact, she was overjoyed. As she watched their grandfather head off to the garage, Melody thought back to the previous spring, and the spring before that. It's true that her father tended to get a little distracted at the end of the school year, but this was different. For the past few weeks, she'd forgotten the distinct impression he was hiding something from her. She was pretty sure now she knew what it was. When she heard a tiny, faraway voice calling her name, Melody realized she'd completely forgotten about Nick. "Bishop!" he was shouting in the phone. "Bishop, are you there?" "I'm here," said Melody, "and you'll never guess what's happened. I'll give you a hint. It's about my dad." Nick Wu and Melody Bishop had been best friends since they'd been in daycare together. People sometimes teased them about being boyfriend and girlfriend, but it wasn't like that at all. "Don't tell me you found another book in the freezer," Nick said. "No," said Melody, "but last night in the middle of the night the phone rang and woke me up. I heard my dad talking to someone. Then when I asked who I called, he told me it was the wrong number." "What's so strange about that?" Nick asked. We get wrong numbers all the time in my house." "This wasn't a wrong number," said Melody. "My dad definitely knew who she was." "She? How do you know it was a woman?" "Because right after my dad hung up, I heard him call her something." "What was it?" asked Nick. "Honey." Nick gasped. "No wonder your dad's being acting so strange," he said. "You know what this means, don't you?" Melody knew. Even though he'd never said it, Melody could tell her father's heart had been broken when her mother passed away. For years, Melody had been making the same wish on every birthday candle, eyelash, wishbone, and shooting star that came her way. Now it had finally come true. "My dad's got a girlfriend," she said. "Who is she?" asked Nick. That's what Melody wanted to know, too.